Hello and welcome. Great to have you join this webinar today. So we're going to give a few minutes for more people to join, and we'll be starting in the next 1 minute. Hello and welcome. I'm Florence Zamed, the Associate Director for Global Communications with Innovations for Poverty Action, a research organization dedicated to discovering and advancing what works to improve the lives of people living in poverty. It is our pleasure today to host this event alongside our partners, the University of Oxford, the World Bank, the London School of Economics, and the Ethiopian government's refugee and returnee services on the sidelines of the Second World Summit on Social Development happening right now in Doha. This webinar will discuss how partnerships between governments and academia can be leveraged to improve our understanding of how to facilitate access to dignified work for displaced populations and host communities. We will be discussing how the Ethiopian government's refugee and returnee service is working with academics to evaluate the rollout of two programs aimed at improving the integration of refugees into economic and social systems, and also how partnerships like this can be leveraged to generate generalizable learnings to improve the efforts and support refugees in achieving self-reliance. And these are just two of 50 projects across more than 20 countries that have been supported by Innovations for Poverty Action and JPAL's Displaced Livelihoods Initiative. The Displaced Livelihoods Initiative generates and shares new research on policies and programs that can foster sustainable livelihoods for displaced and host communities, with the goal of ensuring that policymakers and practitioners have the data they need to make informed decisions. This initiative is generously supported by the IPA Foundation. Our efforts are part of a much broader global effort to push for the evidence base on economic inclusion and social protection, in part through a multi-stakeholder pledge to the Global Refugee Forum led by UNHCR and the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative, which IPA is a co-convener. One of the core pillars of this pledge is to advance data and evidence on these topics. So we see our work sitting squarely within this commitment. You can learn more by scanning the QR code on the screen. So I'll mostly leave it to our panelists to talk more about this work. But as you know, Ethiopia is one of the largest refugee hosting countries, with over 1 million refugees and asylum seekers, primarily from South Sudan, Somalia, and Eritrea. The majority live in 24 refugee camps established across 5 regional states, while over 70,000 reside in the capital, Addis, as urban refugees. In 2019, the country's parliament passed a groundbreaking law granting refugees and asylum seekers the right to engage in wage-earning employment, self-employment, and obtain business licenses, making Ethiopia one of the most progressive environments for refugee economic integration. Access to dignified work for all is fundamental to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As global leaders convene this week to lay out a plan for the future of social development at the Second World Summit on Social Development, millions, particularly displaced populations, remain excluded from stable and fair employment, often facing precarious, unsafe, or informal labor conditions. Ensuring universal access to dignified work is essential to uphold human rights, strengthen social cohesion, and build resilient communities that can thrive in the face of future challenges. So as I mentioned today, we'll be discussing two projects that aim to measure the impact of programs designed to increase refugee self-reliance. The first project is an evaluation of providing formal work permits and business licenses to refugees across 4 camps. And the second project is an evaluation of refugee integration into national public works programs. These studies represent the first systematic evidence on how different policy instruments affect economic, employment, and inclusion outcomes for displaced populations at scale. So today we will hear from academic and policy teams behind this work, as well as from partners who are thinking about how to generalize the learnings. Our presenters, we will begin with brief presentations from His Excellency Ato Mulualem Desta, the Deputy Director General, Refugee and Returnee Services, Government of Ethiopia, who has sent us recorded remarks. We also have on the panel Sandra Rozo, Senior Economist at the World Bank. We have Dennis Egger, Associate Professor, University of Oxford. And we'll also have on the panel Sarah Winton, PhD candidate, London School of Economics. But to add color to the conversation, we have also invited Felix Schmedding, Senior Statistician, UNHCR, World Bank Joint Data Center on Forced Displacement, and Ato Antene Mekesha, who is a team leader, research, mobilization, and livelihoods at the Ethiopian Refugee and Returnee Services. A few housekeeping. We'll start presentations from each panelist and then open the floor to questions from the audience. Thank you so much for making time to join us. If you'd like to ask questions during the event, please submit them through the Q&A function and share your name and affiliation if you're comfortable, so our panelists know who the question is coming from. Feel free to ask questions. We will likely not be able to answer them until the end, but any question that we will not be able to answer during this short time, we apologize in advance. Finally, just letting you know that this webinar is recorded and will be available to watch after the event is over. We ask and appreciate if you want to share this link with any colleagues or any partners that might find this interesting. It is now my pleasure to introduce a video from His Excellency Ato Mulualem Desta, the Deputy Director General, Refugee and Returnee Services, Government of Ethiopia.
Lawrence, if you want, I can present while the colleagues figure out the technical problems. Would that be a good solution in the meantime?
Yes, Dr. Sandra Rozo,
Super.
who is a Senior Economist, World Bank. Take it away.
Thank you. Let me share screen with you all. Okay, let me know if you can see my screen, please.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. And before I kind of begin talking about the topics that I wanted to highlight, I want to make a big shout out to the Ethiopian government for the incredible partnership in all the work that we have been developing. They have been incredible in partnering, in creating knowledge, in championing these policies that are trying to create ways to promote refugees and push their self-reliance. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say. This is not something easy to do. We also are very cognizant that these countries have also their own problems, vulnerable populations that they want to also support. And so this is an incredible effort that they are actually putting together. So what I will do, my plan for today was to basically tell you a little bit of the global trend so that everyone is on the same page of what we know about global displacement, forced displacement, and what I think the policy road ahead from my read on the literature. So what I will present to you is sort of my lessons after reviewing all the literature that has been published, quantitative or qualitative, in the last 20 to 30 years around this topic. So before kind of I diving into the main trends that I want you to have in mind, which are three, I wanted to give you a definition. So I know that many of you might be very familiar, but when I present, I've actually have found that people don't really understand or have a very clear definition of what forced displacement is. So essentially, just to be and so that we are all on the same page. Forced displacement refers to the involuntary, and that word is very important. Basically, a migration that is not planned is something that people have to do because they are facing an emergency or very, very extreme circumstances, such as violence, persecution, conflict. It could be very extreme economic crisis or human rights violations. And so there are kind of four categories globally that the United Nations has created for these populations around the world. So the first one and the most common one that we kind of see in the news every day are refugees. And so those are the individuals that cross between countries and are recognized for the countries that are hosting them. Then we have the internally displaced populations that are people moving within their same country, but that are also moving involuntarily. And then we have asylum seekers, that's the third category, and they are more related to those individuals that cross countries but are not recognized yet by the hosting country that receives them, but they are trying to seek that refugee status. And then there is like a fourth category, which is not well known, is very political in nature, but basically corresponds to those populations that are forcibly displaced and are under the protection of the United Nations, but because of political discussions are not labeled as refugees. And so, for example, one population that is considered in this one is the Venezuelans in Latin America, just to give you an example. But there are many more populations, but they are also under the protection of the United Nations. So now we begin with the trends. These are the things that I want you to remember and why what we're going to present today is so important. So essentially, this figure here is showing you all the data we have globally on the size of the forced displacement flows. So in 1951, the United Nations started collecting data around this topic. And so you see the red line that is kind of tracing there is showing us the aggregate of these flows. In 1993, the UN started kind of collecting data for the different categories that I just explained to you. And then the blue line is kind of showing you how it aggregates in time. But I guess the first trend that you get from this picture as soon as you see it is, oh my God, these trends are exponential. They are increasing dramatically in time. It doesn't seem that this problem is kind of slowing down in time. If anything, we see more conflict and more crisis, which is very sad. But it kind of points to the urgency of starting to create new solutions that are evidence-based. So that's the trend that I want to highlight. Importantly, what we see right now is that nearly every continent in the world has a forcibly displaced crisis. So in this figure, you see the flows in the like top origin and destination countries. And what I want you to take from this figure is that the majority of the origin countries and the destination countries are in the global south, in developing world countries. Essentially, 75 of these almost 120 million population, which is obviously an understatement because there's a lot of people that we cannot count, um, that are not registered, are actually living in developing countries. So this is very much a problem of the developing world. And so this is something that maybe sometimes is not as clear. So the first trend is very, very exponential growth of this problem and mostly focused on developing countries. The second trend that I want you to have in mind is that what we see all across the board is that there is very, very low refugee return rates. So essentially, when we kind of check historically whether the populations are going back to their countries of origin, there have been some few exceptions around the 1990s and 2000s, but generally speaking, the last 10 years, if we were to take an average of the share of refugees that are returning to their countries, that would be lower than 3%, implying that it's not very common for these populations to return, not because they have certain plans, just because they have been traumatized in these countries, and for them actually returning would be very difficult. Also, a lot of these displaced populations have been in their hosting countries for many years, 20 years, 30 years. So a lot of their children are born there and they don't even remember what it was to live in their countries of origin. There is kind of an exception to this rule, which is the current Syrian crisis, which is evolving perhaps to allow the opportunity for people to return. But if we kind of take out that crisis, the majority of them we see across the world, we talk to refugees and we see that their actual return desire is very low. So first trend, this problem is exponentially growing. Second trend, these are protracted crisis and refugee return is actually very, very low. And the third trend that I want you to have in mind is that actually we have a large funding gap. This is part of this context right now, the global context that we have, but also part of what we have seen in the last 10 years. Essentially, these bars are showing you the amount of money that is demanded by the top 20 countries in the world to host these communities, to kind of get help from the humanitarian community, from the international donors. So both colors are showing you the amount that is actually demanded. And the dark blue part of the bar is showing you how much we cannot be met every year. So essentially, what I want you to take from this graph is in 2024, that's the last data that we have, 45% of the funds that were requested could not be met. And this, of course, is getting more difficult with the current context. And so if you put all of this picture together, the three trends that I just showed you, we have exponential growth, we have people that are not returning in time, these are protracted crises, and there is less and less funding, then it kind of makes us think, how do we rethink this model so that we can support the hosting communities and the refugees to make this more sustainable? And this is where all of these research that we're going to present today is going to come to be very important and very relevant to create this new evidence. And so what we take from these three, in my view, is that there is a very strong urgency to transition from a pure humanitarian model. We're just trying to help these individuals by giving them, certain basic needs, to meeting basic needs, to actually trying to help them, even temporarily, while a permanent solution is kind of, think through ways to create their own income, ways to become self-sufficient, ways to contribute to the places where they are actually being hosted. And so this is one, let's say, policy in which the Ethiopian government has been incredibly progressive, incredibly supportive in creating this knowledge and being open to test new policies. And so a great opportunity for researchers like Dennis, like me, like Felix, to actually create knowledge in what are the effects of these policies and how can they transform truly the lives of these populations and their hosts. But not all is green. So what we see when we actually put together an index of the policies that the world has been implementing since 1951, and then I classify this here with my team to continents. So it's basically a component, a principal component index, saying basically showing you the variation. Zero means that the policies don't really support refugees or hosts, are not very progressive, and one would mean that they are actually offering these populations very, very similar opportunities and those that live in these countries. And what you see all across the board is that every continent in the world is improving in this direction. They are offering more provision of public services, of welfare. They are letting people work on property. Of course, it is moving slowly, but the trends are clear. They are positive. They are offering secure entry and legal status. And what is very interesting, and I would like to highlight today, African continent, which is the blue line, is actually moving very quickly from being one of the countries that offer the worst policies, the most restrictive policies that were not inclusive, to actually being top there in kind of moving very quickly to offering these communities the opportunity to recover their lives. And so, of course, Ethiopia here is a big leader and in pushing these policies. And of course, we're very fortunate to be here discussing that today. And so with this, I will finish to give the floor to my co-authors and fellow academics. I just wanted to highlight that this trend that was part of a paper that I made for Box Development on a literature review for displacement. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Sandra Rozo, Senior Economist, World Bank, for the presentation on this evidence on economic integration of refugees. We'll look back to the first presentation, which was by His Excellency Ato Mulualem Desta, who is the Deputy Director General, Refugee and Returnee Services, Government of Ethiopia.
Good morning, all distinguished guests, partners, donors, and colleagues. This is really a great pleasure for me just to be here with you and address this gathering. My name is Mulualem Dasta. I'm a Deputy Director General for Refugee and Returnee Service. So before I proceed to the presentation, let me begin by sincerely thank Innovation for Poverty Action, the University of Oxford, London School of Economics, and also the World Bank Development Research Groups for convening this important session. We are also deeply grateful for the opportunity to contribute alongside the esteemed partners in advancing evidence-based solutions for refugees, inclusion and resilience. So as you know, Ethiopia is one of the largest refugee hosting country in Africa, with over 1.1 million refugees from 34 different countries. So having a robust evaluation system it's really serious and also one of our core government mandates. So on this regard, why evaluation of program is a priority for RRS. It's as I said earlier, evaluation is not only a squad priority but also a government mandate for the refugee and returning service. At the federal, as a federal institution responsible for leading Ethiopia's refugee management and inclusion agenda, RRS places strong emphasis on protection, monitoring and evaluation as central pillar of our mandate and refugee response. As I said earlier, Ethiopia is the largest refugee hosting country in Africa with over 1.1 million refugees. This scale of operation demands that every policy, programs, partnership being guided by credible evidence and measurable impact. Therefore, through rigorous monitoring and evaluation, we are able to assess what works, what doesn't, and why. And also, we are able to design effective and sustainable programs that promote self-reliance and local integrations, strengthen accountability and transparency in the use of public and partner resources, and also we are able to generate credible evidence to inform policy reform and mobilize continued development cooperation. Ultimately, evaluation helps us to ensure that every intervention contributes meaningfully to both refugee protection and host community development, supporting Ethiopia's broader inclusion and resilience agenda as well as goals. So when I come to why we are really keen just to have a partnership with different research institute as well as academia is partnership with such academics and research institutes such as University of Oxford, London School of Economics, Addis Ababa University, with World Bank research groups and other research institutes like SPABAO is really helping us to bring valuable scientific rigor, credibility, as well as technical expertise to our works. This collaboration ensures that RRS programs are anchored in robust research methods and also global best practices while remaining relevant to Ethiopia's local realities. Academics are bringing an independent and analytical lens, helping us question assumptions, identify gaps, and refine our intervention and also response across all refugee operations in Ethiopia. Equally important, this partnership fosters knowledge transfer, building the research, monitoring, and analytical capacity of our RRA staffs, and embedding a stronger culture of learning and adaptation within our institutions. So, by bridging policy, practice, and evidence, such partnership enable us to translate research findings into tangible policy action that improve the lives and livelihoods of refugees and their host communities. So when I come to the lesson we are learned from our previous evaluation exercise, so our previous experience from various evaluation has taught us that policy intent alone is not enough. The how of implementation and the context in which program operates are equally critical. Evaluation have revealed, for instance, the complementary interventions such as access to finance, market linkage, and skill development are essential to make economic inclusion policy truly effective as well as more efficient. So in this regard, we have also learned that collaborative programs, design and adaptive management, where evidence continuously informed decision makings lead to more sustainable and equitable outcomes. So in this regard, RRS has integrated monitoring, learning and evaluation systems across all major programs and each program interventions, and also strengthen coordination with line ministries, regional bureaus, and all other very critical stakeholders across our refugee operation, like development partners, humanitarian partners as well. We are also able to apply lessons from evaluation to shape key international national initiatives, such as the Right to Work Directive that we have been endorsed very recently, and which really create enabling environment for refugees just to actively participate in the labor market of the country by having work permit for wage employment and business license for self-employment economic pathways. Therefore, these steps have helped ensure that Ethiopia's refugee policy are not only well intentioned but also empirically grounded, result oriented, and people centered. So, in closing, having really robust and very modern evaluation, monitoring, and learning system in the organization is really helping just to see how things are really moving and the challenge that you are also facing, and it will also give us evidences and just for future program designing as well as policy development. So in this regard, I would like to really once again express my sincere appreciation to the organizers and partners for this opportunity. Together, through evidence, collaboration, and accountability, we can contribute to build more inclusive and resilient future for both refugee and those communities in Ethiopia. So I really appreciate and thank you so much for this opportunity once again, and I wish you all fruitful deliberation. So thank you so much for your time as well.
His Excellency Ato Mulualem, Deputy Director General, Refugee and Returnee Services, Government of Ethiopia, talking about some of the policy reforms in refugee management, including inclusion and resilience agenda, and the partnerships with researchers in ensuring that there's evidence behind that. So thank you. We're moving on to Dr. Dennis Egger, who is the Associate Professor, University of Oxford, to talk about midline results from their project on improving refugee integration through public works, experimental evidence at scale from Ethiopia.
Thank you very much, Florence, the organizers, for having me and for having us. I can only echo my co-author Sandra's as well as Ato Mulualem's words in saying that this is sort of an academic stream. You know, it's a impact evaluation of a really important program at scale, done in collaboration with the government, the Ministry of Urban and Infrastructure, as well as the Refugee and Returnee Service, to co-create evidence really at scale for one of the pioneering programs in this space, and also with a commitment that then that evidence can then be used to further improve the program in the future and create impact, not just in Ethiopia, but hopefully across the world. So this is really, really exciting for us. We're early days. We have some early results, and I'm very, very happy to start sort of sharing some of that evidence with you now. Can we go with the next slide? So what are we talking about? So the Horizon program is sort of an at-scale attempt of integrating refugees and host populations together in the National Social Safety Net in Ethiopia, which is broadly speaking a public works-based graduation program. So in the first year, beneficiaries work in public works in groups of about 30 beneficiaries at a time for up to 25 hours per week, and they get paid for this. So what they do is typically street cleaning, tree planting, and greening. They're required to save 20% of this income for future investment into a business in year 2. And at the same time, they're sort of getting some livelihoods trainings and group coaching. What's important for the refugee side here is that they also get residence and legal permits for work as part of being in this program. In the second year, next one, yeah, thank you. The program then adds on to this, based on the livelihoods trainings and the business plans developed, a $600 business grant to implement the business plan developed, which goes along with individual coaching and mentoring, as well as some additional, in some of the public work groups, social cohesion activities that get them to work, to meet after work for teas and dinners and further generate some sort of interaction that goes beyond the work. Next one, please. This program targets, no, the previous one, sorry. This program targets both hosts and refugees at the same time, and that's very, very innovative, right? So hosts are selected via PMT-based targeting, whereas all refugees are eligible. And you should think of this as sort of a hosting region where there's a refugee camp in a nearby city, and both these sort of poor, vulnerable hosts as well as refugees are benefiting or participating in this program. And what's also sort of a unique feature of the design, and we'll go more into this, is that some of the public work groups are mixed. So refugees and hosts work alongside each other to improve the public goods in this neighborhood, while in other groups it's refugees only or hosts only that work together. Next slide. This program is large, right? It's large both at the household level as well as for the general economy. So at the household level, 25 hours a week is quite a substantial commitment in terms of labor. But it's also a substantial boost in terms of the financial resources. So in the first year during public works, households get paid about 30% of their baseline income. And so that represents a sort of substantial increase in income from the program alone. And if you then add in the grant, which represents about half of sort of annual spending in the control group, that really then is sort of potentially transformative for these households. Next. But it's also potentially transformative for the local economy as a whole. So not just beneficiaries, but these cities and camp environments together. Overall, on average, about 35% of households participate in this program across the camps that we study. But this goes from as little as sort of 20% up to over 70% of households. And if you think now all of these households benefiting massively from the increase in income, supporting more, providing more labor, getting these grants and setting up new businesses, that's potentially going to really change how these local economies work, how refugees and host economies interact. And so we're going to look at not just the impacts on beneficiaries, but also these sort of broader economy-wide impacts of the program. Next. So here's just an example of one of these public work groups at work. You see they get some sort of equipment, and in this particular instance, they're sort of cleaning streets and their neighborhood. It's a very mixed team here, as you can clearly see. Next. I don't really have to say so much about this after Sandra's excellent presentation, but there's basically this situation, right, that she's described with an increasing number of forcibly displaced people, a funding shortfall, and very low return rates. And so Risen really comes in at a crucial time. At a crucial time where, because of this sort of situation, where we need an urgent shift from short-term humanitarian aid to more integrative self-reliance models, and Risen is one of them. It's not just one of them, it's also one of the first to be implemented at scale, across the country in representative refugee hosting areas in Ethiopia, that itself is one of the sort of largest refugee hosting countries. And so it's going to hopefully deliver scalable best practice for other low-income countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. It is also a sort of innovative policy. Sorry, can we go back? Yeah, it is also a sort of innovative policy in the sense that Ethiopia is one of the first sub-Saharan African countries to fully integrate both hosts and locals into the same national social safety net, rather than sort of creating two different solutions for different groups. Next. Okay, so what are we going to try to answer with this impact evaluation? So first, what are the impacts on hosts and refugee beneficiaries? Second, what are the additional impacts of sort of team diversity, this idea that refugees and hosts work together for up to 25 hours a week on sort of team composition, productivity, and social cohesion? And lastly, what are the impacts and spillovers of this program on non-beneficiaries, on local economies, markets, prices, and so on. Next. So where are we working? This is implemented, as I said, at scale across all the major refugee hosting areas in Ethiopia. In particular, it's going to be 4. Punido, hosting primarily refugees from South Sudan, Bambazi, mostly from Sudan, Dabat, mostly Tigrinya-speaking Eritreans, and Asaita, mostly Afar-speaking Eritreans, as well as their local host populations that live around these camps. Next. So how do we do this? So this is a large-scale RCT, which is often sort of called the gold standard for causality. And here again, I want to shout out to RRS and our implementing partners. This is tricky to implement, but it's going to really generate robust and solid evidence that can then be taken forward. So we really commend them on taking this forward and sort of doing this in partnership with us. So we're going to do this in 2 stages. So first, there's a random selection of beneficiaries among those who are eligible for the program. Sadly, of course, the program is oversubscribed, and so there's more eligibles that can be selected, and so there's a random component in that. So by comparing treated versus control, we can sort of directly test the impact causally on beneficiaries. But by exploiting the variation in the saturation, so how many people participate across different neighborhoods of the camps in the local cities, we can also look at these sort of more economy-wide impacts. Next. The second stage of the randomization then involves the group allocation among beneficiaries. So everybody participating in the program participates in a public work group, and that group is randomly assigned. And in particular, we randomly create both mixed, so refugee and host groups, as well as sort of refugee-only and host-only groups. And again, we can use the variation in the share of people assigned to mixed groups to look at sort of neighborhood-level social spillovers and attitude spillovers in this community. Next. We're going to complement this with rich data collections. We're going to have data on 23,000 listed households and 12,000 households surveyed at baseline, midline, and endline. Next. But on top of that, we're also going to create to collect data on markets and enterprises to look at these sort of economy-wide impacts. So we're going to do monthly, bi-monthly censuses of all sellers, survey a subset of them, get prices for over 100 goods and services, and census all the firms in all the neighborhoods, both at baseline and endline, to really look at how the economy changes in response to this massive program. And last, and this is again very innovative, we collect data from all public work groups. So we sort of unannounced visit to these public work groups. We observe them at work. We play sort of what we call lab in the field games, where we sort of see how they coordinate, and we also do additional beneficiary interviews. Next. Yeah, next, please. So here's one of these examples. So the task here was to build a tower as high as possible. And these games are both fun, but also allow us to really sort of understand how these groups work together. Next. So now I'm going to show you some preliminary results. These are only up to year 1. So at this point, beneficiaries have not received the grant yet, so they've worked in public works for about 12 months. And we already see sizable positive economic impacts. So they work about 5 hours more productively. There's very limited crowd out of other productive activities, which is a good sign, and also sort of suggests that labor force attachment in this population is very low to start with. And that boosts sort of household income by 25%, consumption by 4%, and leads to a substantial increase in household assets, both durables as well as the sort of savings that they're required to keep in the bank as part of the program. Next. But beyond this sort of economic benefits, there's also positive impacts on well-being. So we see large increases in food security, reductions in depression, increases in reported happiness and life satisfaction, as well as reductions in stress, and an improved sort of locus of control where people feel better in charge of their own lives. Next. What's interesting, previous slide. What's interesting is that these effects are about 3 times larger for hosts than for refugees. And that just highlights that refugees are particularly vulnerable, and some of these outcomes are very, very difficult to change for refugees. The fact that we do see effects here is encouraging, but again, it just sort of suggests how protracted and difficult these kind of environments are, particularly for the refugee population. Next. Okay, so in addition to the economic and social benefits, we also see these improvements in social cohesion. So it's not just improving livelihoods, but also bringing groups closer together. So we see improvements in people's valuations of public goods, their participation in community groups, how pro-refugee the hosts feel, whether they trust and value the outgroup, and how much, in sort of incentivized games, they donate to the outgroup. Mixing, just next click, please. Mixing adds a little bit on top of that and has additional positive benefits, particularly in sort of improving refugees' social connections, as well as sort of increasing outgroup attitudes. Next. So to conclude, Ryzen is a pioneering program that integrates refugees at scale into a nationwide social protection system at a crucial time. It builds timely evidence, co-created through a strong research policy partnership. Next. And it has already in the short run created large positive impacts, both economically and socially. So what we're going to sort of start to want to understand is sort of which aspects of this multifaceted program are particularly useful. Is it primarily the catch? Or does this sort of mixing and working together and creating public goods add something on top? And stay posted for future results on this. Next. And of course, this is a large program. I've only been able to show you a sliver of the first short-term results, but we're really excited into getting into all these aspects, including longer-term impacts on children, local economy impacts, productivity, and social spillovers. So stay tuned for more research coming out of this. Thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for the policy partners in collaborating with us and generating this evidence together. It's really an incredible opportunity and very excited to work together.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis Egger, Associate Professor, University of Oxford. I think what was very interesting is hearing how this, my assumption is the first sub-Saharan effort to integrate refugees into a national safety net program, and some exciting preliminary results there. We're moving on to Sarah Winton, who is going to be talking about the second project on evidence on the impact of work permits on refugees and host communities in Ethiopia.
For some reason, it says that my video has been restricted. So I'm not sure why that it says that the host has disabled it. Okay, there we go. Great, thank you so much. Caroline, are you providing slides or is Nessa? I can also share my screen if that's easier. Okay, perfect. Little technical difficulties over. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an amazing initiative, and I'm so glad to be part of it. And I'm really thankful to the IPA team for helping me during this very busy time as I'm a job market candidate. So I'm a PhD candidate at the LSE, and I'll be presenting this work on the evidence on the impact of work permits on refugees and host communities in Ethiopia. The light went out. And this work is joint, of course, with my wonderful co-authors, Christian Meyer at Oxford, Garrett Bryan, my supervisor here at the LSE, and Sagai Tekalasi. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So what is this project going to do? Well, let me, Dennis has provided a bit of the context, but I'm gonna, just provide a little bit of a recap and how this really pertains to what we're doing. So as Dennis mentioned, Ethiopia is, of course, one of the largest hosting countries for refugees in sub-Saharan Africa, hosting over 1 million refugees from 4 different populations: South Sudanese, Somali, and Eritrean. And in line with the comprehensive refugee response framework, the government of Ethiopia has actually passed extremely progressive legislation for refugees' economic inclusion via 3 pathways in their proclamation. So these 3 pathways are going to be work permits, business licenses, and these public works schemes. So Dennis has talked a lot about the public works schemes and a bit about these business licenses. And we're going to focus a lot more on these work permits and business licenses to a lesser extent. And so this proclamation, which gave refugees the right to work, was kind of manifested into these three pathways. And particularly, it allowed refugees to obtain work permits and business licenses, which allowed both the right to work, but also to move freely within host communities. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. However, while the law gave the de jure right to work, there are still many barriers that make the de facto right to work hard to obtain. And that's where our intervention is going to come in. So for some context, there's still a huge amount of or a lack of awareness among the host communities and even the refugees themselves on what their rights to work are and what their options are and what this proclamation gives. There's a lot of uncertainty in the administrative procedures, both within some of the field staff within RRS, although thanks to the work we've done with Atumulu Alam and his team, we've coordinated across camps on what the work permit scheme rollout should look like, but also unclear administrative procedures, of course, from the side of the refugees who would have to navigate it. There's going to be language barriers. As I mentioned, we have 4 distinct refugee populations, many of which do not speak the local language in Ethiopia, particularly the Sudanese and the South Sudanese. And so this is going to add additional barriers. And of course, the last is going to be providing the necessary documentation to be able to obtain the work permits. So many barriers that come between the de jure right to work and the actualization of right to work in a de facto setting. So this is where we come in. So we design an intervention to overcome these barriers. And this is done in close coordination with the refugee and returnee services from the Ethiopian government. And we're going to randomize for a group of refugees a comprehensive support package. And so this is, imagine just holding the hand of refugees and helping them through the whole process till they are able to obtain a work permit or a business license. So providing facilitation of the procedure, coaching, support in documentation, covering any fees for providing documentation or submitting various forms. And so this is really important because we're going to do it at a very large scale across a lot of different camps to really understand how this works in different settings and implementation, and also how it has different results. And so we're going to work in 4 camps, 3 in Benishangul Gumuz, covering Sudanese and South Sudanese refugees, and 1 in Somali region. And, again, this is where the work with RRS has been so impactful, because we actually launched scoping missions to many camps with RRS field staff and our local field team to determine which camps actually made sense to work in, both in terms of political concerns and sensitivities, but also in terms of feasibility and the security situation. And so, even the selection of these camps and where we decided to work was fully decided jointly between our team and RRS. And the other thing that we realized as we were doing this is the lack of awareness. And so we designed together with RRS an intervention campaign around awareness to inform both refugees as well as host communities about their right to work. So we can go to the next. So what makes this research so important? We put a quote from some qualitative work that our local team did. So before obtaining my license, I was fined 30,000 birr for selling cement without permission. After getting my license with RRS's help, I'm now running my business legally without problems. And this was said by a refugee in Sheder. So what I think is so important is that this intervention of giving refugees the right to work or helping them actualize their right to work has huge generalizability to other LMIC countries. Actually, 74% of refugees face substantial barriers to the legal right to work. So this is very generalizable. We're also very proud that this is the first experimental evidence on what the impact of work permits are for refugees. And we hope that this study will inform national policy by identifying what models can be scaled for implementing this right to work directive. All right, so what is the impact? What do we expect to learn? Well, I think we've already learned the value of co-generation with government throughout the project. There's so many times when this project would have fallen apart if we hadn't had adaptive strategies in close coordination with the government. So we've learned that that's really essential to doing such large projects. And we've also learned that there's already a huge appetite for work permits and the legal right to work. So over 99% of our refugees listed in Benishangul Gumuz, and 90% of Somali refugees in the Somali region are interested in work permits, which suggests that there are large returns to trying to break down these de facto barriers. And then what we're going to hopefully learn from all of this is what right to work does for refugees. And so we're going to measure it on a wide range of outcomes, including economic outcomes such as work, how much work people are doing, what type of work they're doing, how much they're earning, psychosocial, so not only, things like depression and anxiety, but also, their well-being and their happiness. And then, of course, inter-household dynamics, because it could shift who does what within the household depending on who gains the right to work or not. All right. And I think there's going to be a lot of policy implications. So as we said, that policymakers will learn insights about the economic and social consequences of refugee economic integration, which is, of course, important for their own context. But I think also we'll understand the role of right to work in increasing refugees' self-reliance. I think this is especially crucial in the world we're living in today, where we're continually seeing a shrinking of humanitarian aid. And so reducing refugees' dependence on such aid is first order in terms of sustainable solutions. I think beyond that, the evidence will be crucial to inform Ethiopia's national strategy and guide how they use their limited resources to best support refugees. And we hope that by documenting both impacts of our program and the implementation processes that we're going through with RRS, will provide a replicable model of refugee integration that other low and middle income countries can use that themselves host large refugee populations. Okay, and a little bit more about our partnership, because I guess, it's something we're so proud of and I think has made this project so valuable. So we are partnering with the government of Ethiopia's refugee and returnee services. And, this is built on the fact that the government of Ethiopia had already signaled strong commitment to the economic integration of refugees. And this in turn led to support of our project. We've built a strong partnership with the refugee and returnee services, and this has been through systematic engagement and capacity building. And I really want to emphasize this co-generation of research, as RRS has been directly involved since the early stages in everything from sampling, research design, how we did the lotteries, doing them publicly at the household level, really all the stages. They've been by our sides helping us and teaching us what works and what does not work in Ethiopia. And I just want to cite a few of our workshops we've held and evidence of how much we've poured in, how much energy both RRS and our research team have poured into our relationship, from our inception workshop in March 2023 to our MOU, to a series of workshops that have brought together RRS leadership, but also RRS field office staff together to advance the project. And that's it.
Thank you so much. Also welcoming Ato Antena Mekasha, who's a team leader, research mobilization and livelihoods, Ethiopian refugee and returnee services. He is going to be representing His Excellency Ato Mulwalem for this portion of the panel. So, Felix, the Joint Data Center brings together the resources and expertise of UNHCR and the World Bank to improve and support the collection, analysis, and dissemination and use of data that informs policymaking and programming on displacement. In this role, how does your team support partnerships between academics and policymakers?
Thank you so much, Florence, and also thank you so much to all the colleagues who shared these impressive examples from Ethiopia. It's a pleasure to add a global perspective, I think, to these amazing achievements and successes that we've heard from Ethiopia specifically, Because of course, research on forcibly displaced populations is needed in many contexts. And of course, partnerships between academics, governments, and also multilateral agencies are equally important in other contexts. But it's really, I think this has been a fantastic sort of, showcasing of best practices and great achievements in that space. So at the Joint Data Center, we're very happy to enable this kind of thing. In fact, we have elevated it to one of our strategic priorities. And we do so in two sort of areas, or in two ways, broadly speaking. One is more foundational, and one is more on sort of making those partnerships and linkages and connections work. So on the foundational side, if you like, we try to make sure that there is that we enhance the availability of microdata for academic research, both through supporting primary data generation, but also making sure that that microdata is accessible and that there is greater microdata openness, especially in the humanitarian sector. And we do that in a variety of ways. One of the big ways in which we do that is through supporting what we call statistical inclusion. So we're talking about inclusion of forcibly displaced populations in these large national household surveys, whether it's a mix or a DHS when they were still run, or a labor force survey, or a household living condition survey, and making sure that those are expanded to the refugees, the IDPs that are often excluded from these surveys. And I think we had a recent case also in Ethiopia, where together with colleagues in RRS, but also the National Statistical Service, we helped expand the National Household Welfare Survey to the refugee camps. And we do this kind of thing in several countries. And of course, that's a hugely rich and valuable sort of primary data source that can be used for academic research. We also supported the establishment of the Forced Displacement Survey, which, if you're not familiar, is UNHCR's new flagship survey program that also provides some really, really strong and robust household level data. And we also supported the establishment of a microdata library within UNHCR, where a lot of this data that UNHCR produces, especially through surveys, is now easily accessible to research, is easily requestable to academics. So these are, this I think creates a lot of the sort of the data for academic research to be done on forced displacement, and is this sort of first area that I mentioned that is sort of the foundational support or enabling environment that we try to create for this. But then we also have this area where we try to enable this direct link between academics and policymakers and practitioners and also donors and all these sort of these data users that have so much to gain from learning from the work that academics are doing and that researchers are doing. And the most tangible way of doing that is what we call the marketplace on forced displacement research, which we're in the process of launching, which is an online platform that is envisaged to create a direct and very action-oriented link between academics and policymakers and other practitioners, where we're trying to sort of bring that supply and demand closer together, right? So in a way, we're trying to change the way in which research informs operations and policymaking by getting these practitioners to put forward their evidence needs sort of explicitly and have researchers react to these requests, rather than often sort of have academics develop a sort of a research proposal and then sort of deliver that to the policymakers and the practitioners and the field practitioners sort of in the dissemination phase. I think what we've heard from Ethiopia is very much already delivering to this vision, but I think we're trying to also make sure that this happens in other contexts, because as we've seen here in these two examples from Ethiopia, it makes such a difference for the uptake and the use of the data if that sort of data demand or evidence demand is sort of informing the design of the research from the get-go. And I think it's such, it just reinforces what we're hoping this will lead to with the marketplace once it's up and running.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
relatedly, sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. Thank you so much. I think that is really interesting. I wonder whether, just turning it over to Ato and the research teams, building strong partnerships isn't easy, right? Particularly given that these programs and evaluations are taking time and they take place over years. So maybe switching to Ato, what strategies have you found allow you to learn together best? Maybe you tell us from your experiences, how does the government and academics who are in this webinar today, how do they build and develop these partnerships?
Okay, thank you, Florence and the organizers. I would like to thank all the organizers, and indeed, it's a great pleasure for me to present on this panel on behalf of our Deputy Director General Ato Mulalam. As you know, building a strong partnership is not that much easy. It's very difficult, and it has to be well managed. So, especially when you are talking about the programs and evaluations that stretch over years, what we have been doing with the Oxford University and London School of Economics, the research program. So, bringing and getting all partners together is the main and key critical point while we are building our strong partnership with research institutions. Whether it's government institution, academic institution, or any developmental organization, we need to engage them at the start of each intervention. So together, bringing these all partners together will help us just not only to develop research questions, but also just to identify and manage the implementation strategy of that research. So in this regard, bringing all partners and engaging all relevant stakeholders in the research is very critical, because when you bring all stakeholders and everyone feels a sense of ownership, and the work stays connected to what's actually needed on the ground. And that's what we have been observing from the partnership we have already established with the research team from the London School of Economics, from Oxford, and other research institutions, including the World Bank. Let me give you an example. In Ethiopia, we worked on refugee employment initiatives with different humanitarian development partners, and as well as also research institutions. So the engagement of RRS is far beyond policy advising. So we closely work with the research team, as mentioned by Dennis and Sarah. RRS closely work with every research institution. So this creates the ownership of that research results. So we, RRS, are eagerly waiting for the findings of those researches and include in our future policy engagement. So just bringing all stakeholders and all relevant partners to the point is very critical on building a strong partnership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ato Atene. Sandra and Felix, from your perspectives, what is the role of multilaterals in the partnerships? How can a multilateral system best support and partner in collaborative learning? Maybe we can start with you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Lauren. So I think that I will, of course, speak for my position at the bank and the team where I kind of contribute, which is the research department. And so that we have kind of a very unique an advantage position to kind of collaborate in these type of initiatives because of two things. The first one is that these type of initiatives are very expensive to scale, and the government, of course, needs a lot of support, which is not only related to research. And so there is a huge team of colleagues in the bank that are actually helping get the funding to the government and helping coordinate with the IRS every day and helping us, like they meet with us, with Dennis and I, and kind of get together what we need from the research side. But there's a huge number of people involved in trying to really help us communicate and get to the regions, kind of to be able to implement the program and the evaluation. And so I guess that the bank is actually leveraging the funding at large scale, but also they're facilitating the creation of knowledge that is technical and high quality. And so the bank in that sense is uniquely placed to actually provide the funding, but also guide the technical knowledge to generate the research. And I guess with that, I will give the floor to Felix.
Thanks, Sandra. And I think you've already outlined it very well on the bank side. Maybe let me contribute also or complement from the UNHCR side, as sort of in that development humanitarian space. What is the role of multilaterals, or what can multilaterals contribute to these partnerships? I already spoke a little bit about the enabling environment, as has Sandra, but maybe also to add on the humanitarian multilateral side that, of course, there is also this growing and evolving role of humanitarian multilaterals as sort of demanding of this kind of research, right? We've heard these big trends that Sandra outlined in her presentation at the very beginning, where on the one hand, you have the vast majority of forced displacement now being in protracted situation, around 70% of refugees, I believe. Currently, we also have these drastic funding cuts to multilateral institutions. So there's this, on the one hand, there is this growing need for research on successful examples of transition from humanitarian service delivery to strong and inclusive local systems and self-reliant forced displaced populations, but also a way to find more cost-effective ways of working. So I think there is this desire and this need and this interest from multilateral agencies also for this kind of research, but also a growing pressure to have that research be action-oriented and immediately applicable in humanitarian work, so that any investment in that space can be justified in this resource-constrained environment.
So we have quite a number of questions coming in from the audiences, and thank you for the people that are watching this webinar and are sending all these questions our way. I want to make sure that we get to at least a few questions before closing time. So we have one question here that goes to Dr. Dennis and Dr. Sandra saying, these projects are enormous. What are some of the challenges that you faced in running studies this large? How have your teams overcome them?
So Dennis, taking the question because you haven't had the opportunity to talk. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Where to start? They are enormous. They're nationwide. They last several years because we want to understand not only the short-term impacts, but the medium, longer-term impacts. The program alone takes 3 years, but eventually we want to know if people are better off 5 years down the line, right? They also take place in fragile settings, right? We know that there's the crisis in Sudan with increasing refugee inflows. In several of the camps, the situation is unstable, as in some parts of Ethiopia, security-wise, there's challenges. And so I guess this makes research all the more important because these are very under-researched kind of situations and contexts, but also all the more difficult. And I think what it requires is a sort of flexibility on part of the implementers as well as the research team, and very, very close collaboration. So Ato Antanes basically said it. We are basically coordinating from the very, very beginning. We're meeting weekly. We're sort of coordinating strongly together our approaches to new upcoming difficulties or situations. We inform each other where we're at. Sometimes the data we collect can actually help the implementers improve the program or have a better view of the situation on the ground. Sometimes, data or knowledge that the implementers have on the dynamics and what are the challenges can then inform the kind of data we want to collect or the approaches we want to take on the research side. And so basically, it requires flexibility, it requires much more close collaboration between all aspects and all partners in the collaboration. I'll just give you a few examples, right? In one of the camps, we could not do a baseline because the security situation was too unstable, and we, of course, would not want to put anyone at risk. In two of the camps, we had this idea of mixing, right? This was actually not possible.
Your time, you can't collect surveys, but it is possible, and actually it will change the course because this money is so needed, and governments really desperately to actually know what is effective and what works. And so we kudos to all the donors that are supporting us, IPA, JPAL, Hilton, and well, the bank itself. So we have shown in this collaboration with the government that it is possible to do this in large scale. Despite all the difficulties we have faced, we have pulled it off, and we will have an evaluation, and we will learn a lot of the things that maybe we can do better, but also the things that worked. And that could change the life of a lot of people. And so I think this is incredibly important to do, despite being risky, despite being difficult. It is possible. We can create evidence in humanitarian settings and learn from these experiences. We don't need to fly blind. And with that, I will just stop. Thanks.
And that's a great segue for one of the questions that we're having here. Just before we wrap up, at Athene, someone is asking, are there ways in which this research is already informing decisions of the refugee and returning services, and what are they?
Athene, you're muted. We cannot hear you.
Okay, thank you. Honestly speaking, the partnership with the research institution comes from a shared realization. There is a unique opportunity from the government side. We have, as mentioned before, we have the most progressive refugee law that grants refugees to engage in different employment pathways. And at the same time, as Sarah mentioned, there are also barriers and there are challenges on the table. So as Ethiopia taken bold step to legalize work rights of refugees, there are also some challenges. By turning that policy into real and practical outcomes, we have been facing different challenges and barriers. So this requires both operational support and solid evidence in that regard. So at the same time, the World Bank and researchers at Oxford and LSE were really interested in how labor market intervention affect both refugees and host communities. That's where the first conversation began. So based on those pointers, the research team have been working closely with us, and we have been also learning from time to time on the policy gaps and the implementation gaps that we have been facing. So in that regard, as presented by Dennis, for example, the Ryzen impact evaluation, we have been learning more, and we have been also taking measures just to correct the gaps what we have been challenging in the implementation of the refugees' right to work. So these researches have big and huge benefit for RRS as a government to take measures and to give evidence-based decision-making on the issues that we and our partners are facing in implementing their intervention. So it's very critical and it's very useful for us by partnering with research institutes. And we recommend also to come other researchers just to assess and research in untouched and unreached areas of the refuge operation in Ethiopia.
Thank you so much. Sarah, one of our audience is asking, how can we ensure that the impacts of your work is sustainable? Are there any steps other governments can take to effectively integrate the lessons from this work?
Yeah, so these are great questions, and of course the multi-million-dollar questions we're after. So I think a lot of these things are about finding what can be sustainable. I think as Antuna and I have learned, there are things that do not work and things that maybe work, but only if you have a lot of money and need to do it for 5 people, and that's very different from the solution that's going to work for 5,000 people or 500,000 people. And so I think, that's part of where piloting and trying different modes of implementation of the same sort of intervention
on improving populations. Perhaps you can talk about some of the lessons that you bring from your work in Colombia that you've studied really deeply into your work in Ethiopia.
Yeah. So I would say that you can classify the knowledge that we have already in forced displacement, the more recent knowledge, into kind of, let's say, fields. One is the research that is trying to see what happened with the hosts. Essentially, refugees arrive and what happens with the host in terms of economic outcomes, labor outcomes, education, health. And I would call that the first generation of knowledge. And then we have kind of the newer research, which is more related to what policies can help us support these communities, hosts and refugees, kind of recover their lives. And so, of course, Sarah's work and the paper that we're writing with Dennis and co-authors is part of this new agenda. But essentially there we see that there is incredible promise from policy approaches that are allowing refugees the opportunity to work. So there is a very great example in Bangladesh in which they actually allowed, by Erin Kenley and co-authors, in which they actually allowed refugees to work without pay in the camps, and that had dramatic effects on their welfare, specifically on mental health. And so, the evidence is very promising concerning my work in Colombia. So there, we actually also had the fortune of working with a very collaborative government, which allowed us to evaluate the effects of large-scale regularization, basically job permits, and integrating these refugees into all the social networks. Every program that is available for every Colombian was available for the Venezuelan population there. And this was a large-scale program to all the Venezuelan population. And it had a huge policy impact. So essentially, we did this evaluation, we showed it worked in improving the outcomes for refugees, and then the government used that evidence to make that available for every Venezuelan in the country. And then other countries in the region, Latin America, actually copied this model. And so then we ended up with a region that is very progressive in terms of the policies that they offer to refugees, in terms of job permits, because we created the evidence. And so that's how impactful evidence can be. It can change policies in the world. If you show something works, then people would be less afraid to do it. And actually, governments are very eager to show that evidence because they are also afraid of the consequences of what they are doing. And so I think these are incredible opportunities to actually guide policy, but also to support other countries that are perhaps not there yet in terms of political willingness, but that there actually would benefit to seeing these experiments in other countries that are maybe taking these first steps and will actually take those steps once they see they work. And so that's how impactful in the ground, in the lives and actual, let's say, everyday policy, these type of evaluations could be.
Thank you so much. And thank you once again to our panelists. These have been very informing conversations for researchers, program implementers, or governments who are interested in evaluating their programs. We wanted to share 3 of IPA's active competitive funds, which may be of interest. You can find more information on the scope and types of projects that these funds support on our website. Finally, just wanted to say a huge thank you for joining us today and for your thoughtful questions. In the coming days, you should receive the recording of this event to your email. If we didn't get to your question today, please feel free to reach out to Displaced Livelihoods Initiatives team at displacement@poverty-action.org. But one final thank you to our partners, the Ethiopian Refugee and Returnee Services, the World Bank, University of Oxford, London School of Economics. We hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.